This is getting a little bit depressing. We've talked about all of these physiological responses of stress, and we can't escape it. You said it's genetically predetermined that we're going to experience this no matter what. There's so many physiological reactions happening in our bodies.
Right, and for the most part, they're inescapable because they're, like I said, we're just designed that way. I mean, it's since the cave. You know, in the distant past, in prehistory, this stress response or this physiological response that we have built into us was a good thing because it kept us from getting eaten by the bear or the saber-toothed tiger that was chasing us. So back then it was a good thing, but there's not too many saber-toothed tigers running around today, but we still have this very hard physiological response to stress. But one of the nice things is that with some self-awareness, with some tools, with some skills, that we can mitigate the side effects of stress. And as helping professionals, we have to do this. We don't have a choice. So the mind is the matter.
But it's also influenced by our social interactions. And so growing up, we learned a lot about how to interpret stress, what it is, and how to deal with it from our families, from our mothers, from our fathers, from our brothers and sisters, from some of the teachers. But learning is a constant changing environment, and we never stop learning. And so, hopefully we don't. And so now that we're getting older, we get stuck into these ruts thinking that these patterns that we're in right now are the way it's going to be and it's never going to change.
Don't talk about we when you talk about getting older, okay?
Yes, you're getting older faster.
But the mind is the matter. The mind is the matter. And you're talking a little bit about nature and nurture, and most definitely it's a combination of the two. It's not one or the other. But if we can learn ways to calm our minds and still our minds, regulate our own minds, then perhaps we can lower our stress levels.
So what you're really saying is that stress actually changes the form and function of the brain.
Well, I'm not really saying it. The research is really saying it. And in fact, it does. The research indicates that the brain, the actual physical structure of the brain, can be changed by chronic stress. In the research that was done with mice, they had mice that were protein starved, and their brains were very similar to the mice who were not protein starved but were placed under chronic stress situations. So, I mean, you can't argue with a dissected mouse brain.
It is hard. It sounds like a traumatic brain injury. It sounds like that stress not only affects our brains, but also affects our internal organs. We talked about it affecting our heart and our liver, our sugar levels. I mean, it really can create havoc on our bodies. But it also sounds like there's some hope that there's a way to reverse some of this.
Yeah, and we can reverse the effects of stress, and hopefully by the end of this presentation, people will know some real easy techniques that they can use on a daily basis in their practice to help do that.
So what you're really talking about is that your brain actually changes function, that there's actually changes in the size and the structure of your brain.
Yeah, in the form and the function of the brain, because you have to look at it this way. For every stressor, there is a chemical reaction that goes on in the body, and the brain's no different. The brain's a part of the body's a part of the brain. Mind-body connection. You can't dichotomize the human being into pieces. So physiological response, there's going to be a psychological response. Vice versa, psychological, physiological. And this means chemical changes. And those chemical changes over time cause physiological changes, even over the very structure of the brain.
So the brain being part of the effects of stress. Also, we talked earlier about your heart, about your liver, about your endocrine system. So stress can affect us entirely, our whole bodies.
Yeah, chronic stress has been linked as one of the main causes of adrenal fatigue. And if your adrenal glands can't release adrenaline into your system, then you can't even have a stress response in the normal sense of the word.
So we're also talking about professionals having stress, chronic stress every day, very similar to the effects that Vietnam veterans have and those who've had child abuse histories. It seems a little far-fetched.
Well, what the research is indicating, the structure of the brain, the form and the function, if you will, of the brain is affected by a traumatic experience that would cause PTSD in a similar fashion as chronic stress. So over time, someone who suffers from chronic stress can have the same symptoms of someone who suffered a traumatic experience, like in combat or a child abuse victim.
The relaxation response sounds a lot like sleep.
Well, it's a deep state of relaxation is what it is. And the idea is if you can trigger that in yourself, then you can help mitigate some of the symptoms of chronic stress, or maybe even reverse them or stop them altogether, at least for a temporary basis. And that's important because we need some kind of relief from our ongoing daily stress.
Well, isn't sometimes forms of stress positive? I know that when I have been in crisis situations and I have somebody who is threatening suicide and they're standing right in front of me and they're in a serious situation, that I don't fight or flight, I don't get ready to run, and I don't want to beat them up. I get into a very calm state and I get very, very focused. How does that relate to stress, and how does that relate to chronic stress?
Well, I think different people are going to have different responses. But in the case, for instance, let's say with the emergency worker or the police officer or the soldier that's in combat, maybe in that particular stressful moment, they can't really show what's happening to them internally. They can't express what's happening to them psychologically, emotionally, and physically because they're still going to have those physiological responses. But at some point later down the road, they have to decompress. You have to release that pressure cooker at some point. And this is what causes PTSD, is that people have a traumatic experience. They can't necessarily express that trauma in the moment, but later on it plays itself out.